911, where is your emergency?
Too Pleasant.
And
Two kids are dead.
what's the telephone number there?
759-9553.
Is that where you live, sir?
Yes, that's where I live.
Okay, and what do you mean the kids are dead?
That's where Reptile Ocean is. There's a python that got out and killed the two kids.
Say that again?
There's a python that got out. It's a store here. We have
a python?
Yeah, man.
I want to tell you a strange and tragic story. This is a story that I first heard about back in 2013 when it initially happened, and it's always been something that's bugged me. Of course, this story deals with death and tragedy, so that's going to bug anyone. But beyond that, there's always been something about this story that just didn't sit well with me. Now, I don't know if it's just me that feels that way or if you feel that way as well, so you'll have to let me know in the comments after I lay out this story. This is the case of a large African rock python escaping its enclosure and unfortunately killing two kids who were staying in the same home. Now, before we get into the video, I do want to let you know that the video will contain graphic details, including death, so please take care while watching. And I also my goal is to be as respectful for the families involved in this case as much as possible, so I will do my best to provide the information to the point where it's needed and not beyond that. This story took place in August of 2013 in Campbellton, New Brunswick, which is a small city on the east coast of Canada. Jean-Claude Savoie was a local resident and a business owner, and he owned the business Reptile Ocean, which was an exotic reptile pet store selling reptiles, presumably amphibians, and I'm sure some other species of animal as well. His store and apartment, his apartment was above his store, is the setting for this tragedy. A woman named Mandy Treecarton lived behind Reptile Ocean, and her and Savoie were close friends. They also had children around the same age. Mandy had two sons, Noah 4 and Connor 6, soon to be 7, and Savoie had a child presumably around the same age, and they were close friends as well. During the day on Sunday, August 4th, both families spent most of the day at Savoie's father's family farm. The boys had the opportunity to play with farm animals, and in the evening, Mandy and her boyfriend dropped both of her boys, Connor and Noah, off at Savoie's apartment for a sleepover, something they commonly did. At 6:49 a.m. the next morning, Mandy heard pounding on her front door, and she could hear Savoie saying, "Oh my God, your two kids are dead." Shortly after, Savoie made a call to 911.
911, where is your emergency?
Too Pleasant.
And
two kids are dead.
What's the telephone number there?
759-9553.
Is that where you live, sir?
Yes, that's where I live.
Okay, and what do you mean the kids are dead?
That's where Reptile Ocean is. There's a python that got out and killed the two kids.
Say that again?
There's a python that got out. It's a store here. We have
a python?
Yeah, man.
Are they your kids?
Yeah, my neighbor's kids. You know, she's here too. She's next door. She's freaking out.
Okay, stay on the line and put your feet to the end. I have Jean-Claude Savoie on the phone. Okay. He's reporting that a python snake got out and killed two kids.
The snake's still out. I got another kid up there. I got to catch the snake. Can you just send somebody here, please?
Now, this snake was, in fact, Savoie's pet African rock python that did live inside his apartment with him in a homemade enclosure. Now, Savoie's apartment was situated on the second floor of the building that contained his Reptile Ocean pet store. The Reptile Ocean pet store was street front, and the second level to that building was the apartment that he lived in. But this African rock python was his personally, that he kept in his own home. It is not something that came from the pet store below. Now, the initial reports of the snake had it ranging from anywhere between 12 and 15 feet long and at over 100 pounds. African rock pythons are very large constrictor snakes. They live in Africa, obviously, that's where they're native to, but 100 pounds is quite a large snake, and later on we'll see that those numbers were initially inflated. People are obviously stressed and things are happening quickly, and these numbers don't get recorded accurately until later. Now, Savoie was eventually charged with 2 counts of criminal negligence causing death. So now let's fast forward 3 years into the future to the fall of 2016 when the trial of Jean-Claude Savoie begins in New Brunswick. So obviously there are a lot of unanswered questions at face value when you first encounter the details of this story, so the trial does reveal some of that. This snake was kept in Savoie's apartment in a sort of floor-to-ceiling enclosure marked off with some glass. So the snake allegedly escaped its enclosure through a vent hole, which was in the ceiling of its enclosure, giving it access to the greater apartment. As it moved through the ventilation system, it found its way above the couch in the living room, which is where the boys were sleeping, and it crashed through the ceiling. And this is where there's lots of kind of mystery as far as what happened. But the facts that we know are that a snake fell through the ceiling, and the two boys that were sleeping on the couch underneath the crashed area have wound up dead. I will show you a floor plan of the apartment shortly just to give you a better visualization of how this may have occurred. But first, I want to read what the pathologist had to say. And again, before I read this, I'll just give you one more warning. There is some graphic detail here. Forensic pathologist Dr. Mark Galuski performed the autopsies on Connor and Noah 3 days after they were killed. Galuski described 13 groups of linear puncture wounds in groups of 4 that were found on Connor's body. Puncture wounds are wounds that are deeper than they are wide. Many of those wounds were on Connor's face and neck. The pathologist had requested to examine the python's head so he could compare its teeth to the puncture wounds. The pattern fits with the head, said Galuski. There were also pattern abrasions on the skin and hemorrhages in the muscles of the neck. When asked by the prosecutors the cause of Connor's death, Galuski replied, underlying cause, snake attack. Immediate cause, asphyxiation by neck strangulation. The autopsy findings for 4-year-old Noah were similar, with multiple puncture wounds and abrasions. Now, it does go into a little bit more detail, but I think I'm just going to leave it at that. Now, we did also have a report from a veterinary pathologist, which gives us a much more accurate measurement of the size of this snake. So that is Dr. James Goltz. He found that the snake was 12 feet 4 inches in length and weighing about 53 pounds. The circumference of the snake was at its largest 12 inches around, and its diameter was about 4 inches or 4.25 inches. So as I said earlier, the initial size reports of the snake were obviously inflated. The length of the snake was fairly accurate when it was presumed to be about 12 to 15 feet. Of course, the weight is much smaller at 50 feet, 50 pounds, nowhere near 100 pounds as they initially said. So here is a floor plan, not to scale, of Savoie's upstairs apartment. Again, this is the apartment that's above his pet store, Reptile Ocean, that is below. As you can see on the right-hand side here, this is the living room. He has quite a few other enclosures in here. There's in the corner here's a turtle and lizard enclosure. There's a crocodile enclosure over here by the laundry room, apparently another snake cage. But this blue riding python enclosure, this is the enclosure in question. This is an enclosure that I'll show you another picture of in just a second, but this was essentially just behind the living room. And this is where the snake would have got out into the ceiling and then fall on the couch right here where the boys were sleeping. Actually, maybe the photo I have is not a photo of the snake enclosure itself, but this is a photo inside the apartment, Savoie's apartment. This is one of the enclosures in the corner here. You can see the sort of ceiling to floor glass panels that are here. I'm having trouble getting my bearings on this photo. I know that the laundry room is up here. So would this be maybe the crocodile enclosure? I think maybe that is the crocodile enclosure. It's tough to tell, but I think this is the style of enclosure that the snake would have been kept in, and it would have slithered up into the ceiling through a vent, which I'll show you here. This is a photo of the vent that was in the ceiling of the enclosure, and the snake obviously made its way through there. And this is a photo of the couch and where the ceiling collapsed. So there's another shot of the laundry room. Here's the living room, and the snake would have fallen here. Presumably the boys were sleeping either on the couch or on the floor in this area. There were a few people who testified in the trial that the snake had actually escaped a few weeks earlier and was put back into the enclosure. So this is sort of a repeat offense for this animal. And there was also reports of some of the witnesses saying that this vent cover was something that was seen on the floor, and that probably should have been covering this vent hole here, obviously. And that probably would have prevented the animal from escaping the enclosure. So this was something that should have been secured and was commonly seen on the floor, either in the enclosure or just not in the enclosure, but not on the ceiling. And here's a picture of the snake itself that's obviously been euthanized. So those are basically all the details related to this case. You basically have two boys who are having a sleepover at a friend's house. The room they're sleeping in is adjacent to the enclosure of a large African rock python. At some point, the python escapes its enclosure through a ceiling duct, moves its way through the ceiling, eventually falls through the ceiling on or near the boys, constricts them both, taking both of their lives, and in the morning, Savoie finding the python somewhere within that room and placing it back into the enclosure. Now, if you're like me, you have probably a million questions about how is this possible? How did this happen? I want to get into some of those questions in a second because I'm somebody who's coming at it from somebody who understands snakes a little bit better than the general public. I have snakes. I'm a reptile keeper. And there's some things that I think that are important to say and some questions that I think are important to ask. So we will get to that. But I just wanted to close the loop on this trial here. The jury did not find Savoie guilty. He was not found guilty of criminal negligence. There was quite a list of things that they had to prove beyond reasonable doubt to prove criminal negligence, and they didn't feel that it was appropriate to charge him with that. And there was also some things, if you look into this case, there were some things that the RCMP did, some mistakes they made that probably also helped Savoie not have to face any charges related to this. In the initial investigation, the RCMP told and promised Savoie that if he answered a few questions regarding the case, that he would not be charged, that he would basically have immunity for the case. Now, he went forward and answered the questions that they had. Later on, a few months after the initial investigation wrapped up, another department came to review the case. They reviewed it and realized that, or at least felt that Savoie should be charged, and then they went and charged him. So the RCMP both provided him official or unofficial immunity and then charged him later and went back on their word. And I believe that was a big hole in the prosecution's case. So you could look into that more. I'll put some notes in the show notes as well. But now I'd really like to discuss this from the perspective of a reptile keeper and just some of the confusion that I have and maybe you have as well surrounding the details of this case. So this section of this video is coming from the perspective of a reptile keeper, and it is 100% my opinion. I'm not accusing anybody of anything. This is just the questions that I have as a reptile keeper. And the first thing to say again is this was an avoidable tragedy, and 2 kids did lose their life. It's a heartbreaking story. It's sad. It's one of the reasons why I've sat on this for so many years, because I just felt this happened 12 years ago, and I've always felt uncomfortable about even talking about it. But I think it is important to talk about it. It's one of those things that just has bugged me forever. Now, death and injury related to pet snake keeping is something that almost never happens. It is incredibly rare, especially if you were to compare it to something like issues with dogs, dog bites, or mauling from dogs. That's something that does happen, a lot more common. So this sort of scenario, thankfully, is something that doesn't happen very often, but it is still extremely serious and something that we should look into deeper. Now, if you're a snake keeper or you're somebody who understands snakes at a slightly deeper level than the average public, then you immediately have a bunch of questions in your head that you feel like you need to have answered to really understand or wrap your head around how this is possible. If you are not a snake person, like most people, if you have no idea about snake biology or snake behavior, then you are probably assuming a bunch of things that are wrong. And the first thing is snakes almost never kill in defense. Now, I should probably rephrase that. Non-venomous snakes almost never. I've actually never heard of it, but maybe someone in the comments can let me know. Maybe this is something that happens on a very, minority of cases, but I would say in almost all cases, snakes do not kill in self-defense. When a non-venomous snake is experiencing a threat, it's going to hiss, it's going to strike at you, it's going to bite you, and then it'll try to just get away from you. That's sort of its toolkit for dealing with something that it's afraid of. Now, a venomous snake is basically going to do the same thing. The only thing is if they do actually make contact with you with their fangs or with their teeth, you could get envenomated, and then you're going to be dealing with either tons of pain, loss of limb, or death. But in a non-venomous situation, the snake is not going to try to kill the thing that it's being threatened by. Which is to say, when a constricting non-venomous snake kills something, it's a prey response. And this is where the part of this story where I hesitate to use the word prey because I feel like it is so disrespectful for the 2 boys that lost their life. But I'm going to use that word, and we're going to talk about maybe not relating it to the case essentially, but we're talking about in the wild when a constricting snake kills something, kills prey, it's doing it to eat it. Now, the other thing that I think is, because I experience this all the time, when somebody says a 12-foot snake, the average person thinks that is an absolute jungle monster man-eater. And it's really not. A 12-foot snake is a large snake. And don't get me wrong, that's an extremely powerful animal and absolutely has enough strength to kill even an adult through the ability to constrict you. But it is not that large of a snake. Now, I have a 6-foot snake behind me, and people commonly think, oh my God, aren't you so worried that it's going to eat you? Well, its head is the size of 2 of my thumbs, essentially put together. They're not as big as you think. And in the pathologist report, you see that the thickest part of that snake's body was around 12 inches in circumference. So I found this bottle from IKEA, just a glass bottle. And that is basically exactly 12 inches around. So you can see it's thick, but it's not as thick as you might think. So again, if you're a non-snake person, you might think 12 feet. That thing is huge. It's really not a big enough snake to eat a child. Now, that doesn't mean that the snake didn't constrict the boys and try to eat them. And that's sort of what those teeth marks might actually lead on to make us assume happened, because the snakes will often try to eat things that are far outside of their range, and then they give up and move along. And that's definitely a possibility of what could have happened in this scenario. And I think I forgot to mention that the theory of why the snake would have constricted the boys in the first place was because they were playing with farm animals and goats and sheep all day, so they had sort of farm animal scent on them, and the snake smelled that and saw warm bodies and then assumed it was prey, which is definitely another plausible scenario. If your hand smelled like a rat and you put it inside my boa's enclosure, they would absolutely strike and coil that, because that's sort of how they're wired. They're going after scent and heat, and they're not necessarily the shape or the exact look of the item. They can't really see that well to begin with. Their senses of smell and their ability to sense heat is a far more a strong sense for them to rely on. Now, the main questions that I have with this case are A, how does a snake fall through and crash through the ceiling? You saw the tiles on the floor and basically broke through the ceiling, and nobody woke up. All four people, the two boys, the boy's friend, Savoy's son, and Savoy himself, did not wake up through that incident. That, to me, seems really strange. Now, I know people are very deep sleepers, but the sound of something crashing through your ceiling in what seems to be quite a small apartment seems odd. I don't know what that means, but it seems odd. And the second thing that I find very hard to wrap my head around is how both boys were constricted. It is such a bizarre thing. Now, it is definitely possible that a snake can constrict two items at once. That's not an unusual thing. When a snake goes into what reptile keepers will call feeding mode, when they have a sense of prey around, they're like a pistol with a hair trigger. Like, they're ready to go. They're going to grab whatever's around them. So if a snake senses prey and then you walk by, it's going to strike at you because they're kind of in this feeding mode. So it isn't unreasonable for a snake to wrap and coil two items at once. I would say in this scenario, I would have to assume the boys would have had them sleeping right next to each other for that to make sense. And it's also so hard not to run through different scenarios in your mind. Did the snake fall through the ceiling and land directly on top of the boys and immediately coil them? Did it fall onto the floor and again nobody woke up and then it slithered over and then wrapped and coiled them? Nobody will ever know. But from a snake keeper's perspective, those are the questions that come to mind, because it doesn't really make sense off the cuff. Again, I'm not saying it didn't happen the way they're saying it happened. I'm just saying those are it's a very freak an unusual accident in the way that it's portrayed through the trial. I guess it's also possible that one boy was wrapped and coiled and then another one was subsequently, but even then you're still asking three other people in the home to not wake up through any sort of trauma or any sort of noise. Now, a snake wrapping something and coiling it is quite a quiet thing. It's not something that's going to make a lot of noise, but the sound of it falling through the ceiling and then simultaneously wrapping up two prey items, again, I hate to use that word, both the boys at once, it's strange. So I would love to hear what your opinion is on this case as well. Maybe you're somebody who works with constricting snakes. Maybe you have a large collection of your own, or you work at a zoo, or maybe you are somebody who's in the investigation space through maybe you're a crime and a detective or a lawyer of some sort. I just feel like there are some things about this case that don't make sense from my perspective. Again, I'm not accusing anybody of any foul play. I'm just saying that on the face of it, there are some details about this case that are bizarre, to say the least. At the end of the day, this was absolutely an avoidable tragedy. It is a shame and is an understatement that these two boys lost their lives this way. It is a reminder for the reptile community that being a responsible keeper is key. Now, to the non-reptile keeping folk, I want you to know that there are very few people out there that keep animals that are anywhere near to the extent that can hurt you or your family. 99% of people own animals, just like the ones behind me, that are going to max out at 5-6 feet, that are not a danger to you and your family. So you don't have to worry about that. This was actually an example of somebody the example would be comparable to somebody who has an incredibly mean dog that they refuse to train and let roam the streets. That's sort of the comparison there. It's, you don't treat all dog owners like that type of irresponsible keeper. And there's no difference in this story. But reptile keepers, make sure things are locked, make sure things are secure. We don't want things escaping, and you certainly don't want accidents like this to happen again in the future. But again, please let me know your thoughts. Am I totally out of whack for having a very bizarre feeling about this? Is everything as it is through the trial notes and through the details of the case? Is that just what happened? I want to believe that. The more I looked through this and the more I started reading these things, I started to think, okay, maybe this is a plausible thing that could have happened, but I still have some question marks about it. Again, not saying this didn't happen. It is absolutely plausible this could have happened in the way they did. It's just strange. That is it for this video, everyone. Thank you for watching. Again, let me know your thoughts below, and we'll catch you in the next video.